start rolling. This is pre-roll time, so
Okay.
you don't have to worry about that. I can cut it out.
Here we are.
And I'll be quiet.
Okay.
You guys go ahead.
Well, for just starters, why don't you just say, my name is John Bridgeland, I graduated in 78. Something.
My name is John Bridgeland. I graduated remarkably 40 years ago in 1978 from Indian Hill High School.
John, when you think back to your time here, what are a few of the standout memories?
Yeah, so how many hours do you have? I literally went from nursery school to 12th grade at Indian Hill, and so it was, my formative experience. But I think a number of experiences that stand out, I was loved sports, and I was always on the move. And as a result, I actually didn't read as much, and I felt like I was informed as much. And ninth grade comes along, and there's this teacher that most students were terrified of, Mrs. Steele. And she gave every student in the class an assignment and gave them a book to read and to do an oral project and written project on it. And when I got my little slip of paper, I was embarrassed I couldn't really read the author's name. It was Fyodor Dostoevsky, and it was Crime and Punishment. And it turned out to be the hardest book assigned. And when I completed that project, I went from feeling, you know what, I'm not that bright, I'm not that capable, and it completely flipped it for me. I had confidence, I got really interested in reading and studying, and Mrs. Steele turned me into someone who felt that I had really strong capabilities. So I always think fondly of her. My second experience was actually also in ninth grade. We had this basketball coach, Mr. West. And we were a good little team, but not outstanding. But he had so much confidence in us that we played much better than I think we really were. We went on to win the Eastern Hills Championship. And I remember with Mr. West, we were cutting down the nets, how you do when you celebrate the victory. And as I came down with the net in my hand, I got my first kiss from the cheerleader. And that was an especially good day. Another experience was Mr. Nellis, who was my U.S. history teacher, and we had to play, I had to be the lawyer representing Dred Scott in the decision during the Civil War about this slave that had fled to Illinois and seeking his freedom. And the court got it wrong, actually, and ruled against Dred Scott. And so I got to represent him as a lawyer. And I knew it was a really tough challenge, but I threw my heart into it. And with support from Mr. Nellis, we actually won the case. And it was just another moment when I felt like, maybe I could play a small little role in changing history. And that kind of awakened me. And then my final, I promised to stop. my final is I'm a senior in high school, and we're playing in the East-West Tennis Championship. And I'm playing my rival, Doug Korn, and I won the first set, lost the second set, and I'm down 5-0. And my coach, who happens to be also my sister, Cindy Crilly, looks at me and says, "Don't worry about the score. You focus on every single shot." And so I kind of went into this zone and focused on every shot, and remarkably, it was just magical. I ended up winning 7-5. And she taught me about the power of living in the present moment. I'll tell you one more. Is that okay? Boy, it's flooding back. So we're in sixth grade. In the middle school, they had the team system. I was on Team 3 with Brad Casper and Roger Jacobs and Rusty Myers and a lot of my good friends. And we were playing what became maybe a little too competitive football game at lunch against Team 5. And we got in this huge rumble, and it was kind of a rainy day, and we were all covered with mud. And we come walking back into our classroom, and one by one, Dr. Boss, who was the principal, called us to the principal's office to tell us that we thought, are we going to get suspended? And he looked at each of us and he said, you each are really good kids, but you've had a really bad day. And so I'm going to have you work to improve the school and clean up the school and do things for the next couple of weeks. And as you're doing that, I want you to think about making sure you have more better days. And I don't know, it was just kind of a lesson that adults don't have to be punitive. They can be compassionate, but also make sure you learn the the lesson.
Those are great.
Any of those?
Every single one of those is a great story.
Okay. Well, they were.
If you could populate the room on April 13th with Brad Casper, Rusty Myers, and
Yeah. That would be good.
West, Bob West.
Bob West.
No, he's in the area.
Oh, yeah, he's in my sister's book group.
Yeah, so.
And he's
he'd be another person.
Yeah, well, okay, I'll do that. Brad Casper's in Arizona, but Rusty's here. Brad Motes is here.
Planes.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what airplane does.
Yeah, okay. We can talk about that, too. I want to make sure I'm helpful to you.
So extracurriculars, you obviously were a tennis player. You
Mm-hmm.
were head of student government. Maybe touch on, kind of just restate that,
Yeah.
when I was at Indian Hill.
Yeah. When I was in Indian Hill, it was just like this sea of opportunity. You came into school, and I played 4 sports, in part because the coaches were desperate for people on the teams. But some of them, whether it was basketball or football or tennis, you really learned to work together as a team and not be, frankly, so selfish. And then, when somebody was down or you were down, they'd lift you up. I'll never forget, I had kind of a rough football game, and my best friend, who I grew up with, Brad Motes, who lived literally right across the field, across Drake Road from the high school, came over, put his arm around me and said, "We've been throwing footballs since we were 5 years old. You're going to be just fine." And that was a little moment. And so we had this, this tremendous bond among a really core group of people that played together, football and basketball, and some of them tennis. And it's 40 years later, and I still see them. I'm still in touch with them. And it's that sense of community that so many young people actually across the country don't have. That's like the foundation of, I think, a really good life.
You were head of student government?
I was. I was Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
So I ran for student government when I was a sophomore with Susan Kindle, who was a junior. She had come to me and said, I think we might be able to win if I can attract the juniors and the seniors, and you can attract the freshmen and the sophomores. It was sort of an innovative idea of hers, not mine. And I said, well, we'll give it a shot. And so we ran, and we won because her theory of how it might work actually played out. And then when I was going into my senior year, I had the opportunity to be the president of student government. And we had a lot of fun. We went into the inner city, a prison fellowship program. We did mentoring and tutoring. We did a book drive for children in the school systems that actually didn't have the kind of resources that we had. And we did Friday night movie night, which I know is sort of silly now because you can just upload anything on social media at any moment. But it really sort of was eye-opening for a lot of Indian Hill kids that there are a lot of young people out there that don't have the kind of supports and resources that we do. And it also fostered this sense of tremendous personal responsibility. It's been a common thread. At least I've tried to keep it a common thread in the work I've done.
So if you were to look back and have a conversation with your 18-year-old self, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? Or in that regard, today's graduation?
Yeah, that's so interesting because I actually just had this conversation with my 18-year-old son. And he was going off to college, and that very sweet but also difficult moment of he's going off as a young man, an adult, and breaking away from the nest. And the parents are, letting go. And he turns and he says, "Dad, any advice?" And I said 3 words: prepare and relax. And we laugh about it to this day. But it was, as you have tests and papers and exams and whatever it might be in college, pull out all the stops to prepare and do it early. And you'll kind of reduce the stress and the anxiety. And then once you've done that, stop worrying about it and go to the beach or go for a run or go out with your friends and really have a good time. So prepare and relax. Yeah, we've all got the
Let's all
same.
have a little-
I've had this for 3 weeks. I just can't get over it.
Sorry. I'm gonna go.
Is this what you're looking for at all? Okay. Okay, good. I know. You
Now
know.
that I've started.
No, I had this last night for 30 minutes. I'm not serious. Can I do anything? I don't know if I could do anything. I know.
Tears.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
No, I have the same thing. It's a.
I'm a very,
No, you're
You know, I'm
fine.
like-
You're not at all.
oh my goodness. Anyway.
It's going around.
No, this is for, and if I'm trying to reduce the amount of my voice on there,
Okay.
because I'm just kind of like nodding.
Yeah.
But, but take no offense if we stop and just restate,
Yeah, sure.
because sometimes it's not obvious,
What the question is.
you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Sometimes you need to cue up, you know, kind of like,
Right.
what is, you say, this is.
Yeah, this is. Okay.
So the next, good grief, I'm so sorry, all of a sudden it just like fell apart.
No, I have the same thing. And it's really, you can't get it up, the congestion, and it's rough.
So sorry. So the next question I almost feel is like a little, it could be a little forced, but the idea was, and maybe we've already covered it. It was sort of like, what's something in your school background that's helped you as you progress through your professional career?
Yeah.
It's not like something you learned in freshman English, but in some ways it kind of was. So you
Yeah.
sort of have addressed that. But it's just trying to like, you think it's a community,
Yes. I
sense of
can,
personal responsibility of others.
right.
You know, maybe that's
So I
something like that.
yeah. I think more than anything what Indian Hill schools and community brought for me, I spend a lot of time in my work in low-performing high schools. They have this awful name, dropout factory high schools, where literally half the student population is not going to graduate from school. So imagine living in an environment like that every day, where your peers, you don't know whether they're going to be, with you all the way. And we actually did a national survey of students who had dropped out of high school all across the country. And they complained about adults who didn't know their name, didn't know their interests, didn't know who they really were kind of longing for people to believe in them and to connect what they were learning to what they wanted to be in life. And Indian Hill for me was just exactly the opposite. I had a mother who was not only a full-time volunteer from like elementary through middle school. She was like a battalion leader. I mean, she really had high expectations and supported you every step of the way. And a father who was president of the school board and head of the PTA, mayor, and just dedicated so much time, even though he was a busy lawyer, to like investing in the community, investing in us. And then my 4 older sisters, Debbie, Cindy, Becky, and Alicia, who, each marched successfully through the high school, laid the groundwork. So when I came into classes with new teachers, they'd say, oh, that's a Bridgeland. And like it was going to be largely okay. But the other thing I'd say is this community of friends, Brad Moats, we okay?
I'm not sure.
Taping?
Yeah, we're
or-
still rolling. Yeah.
Okay.
So say, start that over again.
So,
This community of
yeah,
friends.
but the other powerful element was this large community of friends. Brad Moats, Brad Casper, Roger Jacobs, Rusty Myers, I could go on and on and on. And Jill Thompson and Becky Shamor and Kay Sanders and Paula Camardo and Eliza Tashian and all these people who you would see every day, not only in the hallways, but in classes and extracurriculars and on the weekends and reunions. And there's just this close-knit foundational friendship that gives you such belief in community and reinforces the importance of community. It's interesting, the neuroscientists tell us that we have a social gate to learning and a social gate to happiness, and that we're not really effective as human beings unless we're connected to one another. When, not to get too high-flying here, but when Thomas Jefferson penned that mystical notion of the pursuit of happiness with a capital H, he wasn't just talking about, more pleasure or cars or houses or, even a good job. All those things were part of it. But he was actually talking about a collective enterprise that we help one another achieve, and that I can't be happy unless I'm worrying about the happiness of my neighbor. And so I think this idea that we care about one another, we serve one another, we often find even in our darkest moments, that's where the happiness comes from. Okay.
Wow, I feel like that's, what else can we say about that? That's great. Let's see, let's go on. There's so much to talk about in your professional life.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's a way to kind of compartmentalize, kind of 1, 2, and 3, or what, but
Yeah.
I know that people would love to hear about your White House administration time.
Okay.
And
Good. Yeah.
water.
Good.
What we might want to do is just start with, let's just kind of try to do a brief timeline, even if we pick and cherry pick it.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like, well, I started here, and then my next thing, my next. You don't have to start at kindergarten. It just.
Right.
You might say,
Yeah.
after Harvard after Harvard and UVA law, I
Okay.
will just kind of
Yeah.
hop, skip, and jump.
Yeah.
We'll let Mr. Dubs get back in his spot.
Mr. Dubs,
I have
good.
my coffee.
Yeah, we all had the simultaneous coughing fit. Can't get rid of it. So after graduating from Indian Hill in 1978, I had this amazing opportunity to go to Harvard College, which frankly was terrifying. I was thinking as I was heading off, can I make it? Can I do it? And what I discovered when I got there was that Indian Hill had prepared me really, really well, and that all the aptitudes and skills and things that I needed, and with a lot of hard work, I could actually make it. And then after Harvard, I went on a fellowship abroad in Belgium, a Rotary International Fellowship, where I had the opportunity to, live with young people from all over the world and speak different languages, even though I'm awful at languages, and to learn about the European Union and, have a different lens on policy and economics and law. And then, because I've always wanted to go into public service, and I grew up at a very exciting time. It was also a kind of a revolutionary time, but extremely exciting, where you saw extraordinary men and women in public life who were changing the country and changing the world. I mean, it's a remarkable thing, but you think Indian Hill schools are located on Drake Road. And just down from Drake Road lived Neil Armstrong, who literally, this youthful president, goes into the well of the house and says, within a decade, we're going to put a man on the moon and safely return him back to Earth. And most people in the house were like, what is he talking about? But the country got organized with the National Defense Education Act. They made huge investments in the space program. And in 1969, I'll never forget being a 9-year-old kid on Drake Road at the house we lived in on the screened-in porch, literally watching, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, Neil Armstrong step on the moon. And so as a very young boy, I had this vision that anything was possible, and that through government and the private sector working together, through public service, you could change the world. And so I went off to law school to get educated to do that, went to a law firm in New York and in Paris, where frankly I found myself working on corporate transactions. And so I wrote this letter to this man I didn't know but I admired. His name was Ted Sorensen, and he was President Kennedy's speechwriter. And I said, Mr. Sorensen, having admired you so long, I'm seeking your advice. I find myself reading books on the Constitution and the Lincoln-Douglas debates, not securities law reporter and mergers and acquisitions. What does somebody with my interests and background do? And I never expected to hear from him. And he writes me this beautiful letter back. And the end of it almost sounds like the inaugural. He says, I hope your interest in public service will continue to burn brightly and be fulfilled in due time. I almost felt like, the torch is being passed. And so I went and worked on Capitol Hill, and with Rob Portman, who's just a lovely human being and a good public servant, and was his chief of staff and lawyer, and he treated me like a peer, and we together we wrote 9 bills that were signed into law, and because it was bipartisan. And we showed up at the chairman of the committee that we needed to move the bill from, and he was investigating Republicans. And Rob and I were in the Republican Party, and his mouth almost fell open because here was outreach, by a Republican, and he hadn't really seen a Republican in a long time who was going to collaborate on policy. And he couldn't do enough to help us and help get the bill passed. And it was just another little signal that if we stand down from our partisanship and we try to do the right thing together, we're driven by facts and evidence, we can do, bold things for the country. And then I had the privilege of serving for President Bush as his director of the White House Domestic Policy Council, and thought it was going to be one job, and then 9/11 hit.
So let's just pause there. So let's just do a whole segment on 9/11.
Okay.
So, you might want to start up. Let's just say
So I'll say it's September, yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Let me just adjust this just to make sure.
Oh, sure. Because it's kind of the way you're seated.
I'm sorry, should
No,
I
I think you're okay.
Am I
No,
okay?
I think you're okay.
Keep hearing that, Rick.
No, that won't, no, that won't.
One second.
I know, but is it coming through literally
Oh,
somewhere?
I don't
that we're
think
not
so.
seeing?
I'm not
Okay.
hearing it.
Yeah, I heard that too, but I think it's in the vent or something.
Okay.
I hope not. That's all I need.
I thought it was like the expansion of the air and the little,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it was just tucked in, it'll work, but I might have to tweak the audio a bit.
Yeah.
This will be better. So, okay, you're still live, so no problem.
So it's September 11th, 2001, and Andy Card was our chief of staff, and he liked staff meetings early, so I came into my West Wing office in the White House at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was a gorgeous Tuesday morning. And as the day went on, I went over to brief the EPA administrator on our cabinet level review of climate change and where we were headed when the first plane struck. And CNN was reporting that it was a private plane that hit the first tower of the World Trade Center. But since my wife and daughter, 3-year-old daughter, when we came back from Paris, had been in the World Trade Center in 1993 when the first bomb went off, and my daughter's first memory is of the bomb, this shattering glass. And thank God it didn't detonate properly. So they were fine. They were on the first floor. It could have been catastrophic. I had this strong feeling that we're under attack. But we went back to our briefing, and then the second plane hit. And the White House called and said, I was with my colleague from the White House Environmental Council, and they ordered us back to the White House. And when I came back to the White House, we then saw on TV that a plane had crashed into the Pentagon. We were evacuated to the White House mess, which is the place where aides eat their meals. And we looked at each other and we said, well, this isn't secure at all. I don't know why we're here. And then we immediately got ushered out by Secret Service outside the White House. And the Secret Service said, take off your shoes and run. And that was for the women in the high heels. And I heard one of the Secret Service officers say, there's an inbound plane. And the inbound plane later on turned out to be Flight 93 that had turned around over the fields of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, and was headed back to the nation's capital. And the trajectories were it was either going to hit the White House or the Capitol. And so literally those people on Flight 93, the guy who said, let's roll, we thought about them every day. They in some senses, saved our lives. So we then were evacuated I was sent to the President's Emergency Operations Center below, which is the bunker below the White House, built to sustain a nuclear attack. And I was there with the Vice President and the Secretary of Transportation, Condi Rice, and other members of the senior team, and literally watched the Secretary of Transportation ground every plane coming into the United States. And then I looked over at Josh Bolton, our Chief of Staff, and I said, I wonder, are the disaster preparedness processes that we have at FEMA up to the task of something so catastrophic like this? And he said, why don't you and Gary Edson, the Deputy National Security Advisor, go over to FEMA and check? And so we went in one of these black cars from the White House. It was eerily quiet in Washington as we went over to FEMA. And we called senior staff together, and they said, we're sorry, Bridge. Most of senior staff is out in Colorado. at a seminar discussing what to do if terrorists struck the United States. Our mouths sort of fell open, like the irony of that. And so we gathered, but the chief of staff was there, and enough of the senior staff was there, and they went through all the the responses that they were, the emergency vehicles, mortuary bags, environmental testing of the air, one thing after another. And I literally brought the declaration for the president to sign to release aid to the Pentagon, New York City, and this town we would later learn was Shanksville, Pennsylvania, to release all the federal aid back to the White House for the president, who came back that night. His aides were actually telling him not to because of the risks, but he thought to show a sign of strength for the country and leadership that he too was going to put himself in that line, and then he signed and released the aid. And so my job went from overseeing domestic policy on more than 100 issues, from education and faith-based and national parks and food safety and a whole host of issues, to being in the Situation Room 3 times a day with Department of Defense, CIA, domestic agencies, talking about how do we harden our assets in airports and planes, how do we worry about our chemical facilities and nuclear facilities, what about our bridges and infrastructure. Because literally at that time, every day I came into work, based on all the scenarios that have been run, we thought there were going to be multiple terrorist attacks. And it's part of the remarkable story. When you ask President Bush what was he most proud of in his 8 years in office, he said, number one, keeping the American people safe after 9/11. Number two, providing historic levels of aid to women and children and adults in Africa for HIV, AIDS, and malaria. And third is creating the largest marine reserve in the world called Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument out in the northern Hawaiian Islands. It was interesting that he picked those 3, but the first was protecting the American people. Too long, sorry.
How would you characterize an emotional shift from before and after, the before time and the after 9/11?
Yeah.
Is there,
Yes, so absolutely. The emotional shift in the country was remarkable. And I'll tell you a story that epitomizes it. So I go to Ground Zero, and I'm seeing the devastation. And there's so much aid and help pouring in from around the country. There's this couple from Seattle, Washington. They get, because you can't fly, right? In the few weeks after 9/11, everything's grounded. They get in their car. They own a restaurant business. They load up their equipment, or I guess in a truck. They had a car and then a U-Haul in the back, and they drive all the way to Ground Zero, and they set up a restaurant to feed the first responders and the operators who were conducting not only the search but the cleanup. And in fact, the response to 9/11 was so strong from the American people, they had to hire a trucking operation at Ground Zero. It actually makes me emotional to carry the excess of American compassion away. And the day after 9/11, I'm in my office up on the second floor, and the White House operators, who you grew to love, because you could ask that operator to get anybody in the world, and they'd have them on the phone in 30 seconds. And they're the sort of institution of the White House. They outlive us all, people like us who come and go. And I talked to this one operator that was just superb, and she said, our phones are lighting up like a Christmas tree. Everybody is asking what they can do. And I got this stream of 500 emails saying, what a horrible day, and what can we do to help? And so I'm in the Oval Office the third day after, and President Bush looks at me and says, Bridge, I want you to create an initiative, I'll never forget his words, an initiative that will foster a culture of service, citizenship, and responsibility. And then he added, for decades to come. And so we created this initiative called the Freedom Corps that provided over 1 million opportunities for Americans to do. They could do Peace Corps or City Year or Teach for America, Habitat for Humanity. They could serve through their faith-based institutions. They could volunteer. And he issues this 2-year call to service in the 2002 State of the Union address. And of all the things he talks about, he talks about the war on terror. He talks about the war that's to come. He talks about the threats to the economy and how we're going to invest in the economy. It's the 2-year call to service. This president saying basically what Kennedy said a generation ago, ask not, that resulted in, the longest sustained applause from both sides of the aisle. And it taught me this lesson that people want to be asked to serve. They want to be kind of awakened out of their ordinary lives to do something extraordinary for the country. And 9/11, as difficult as it was, Tom Daschle, the majority leader, Democrat in the Senate, was hugging President Bush on the House floor. Imagine, we've just had a State of the Union. But, imagine that today, with all the partisan conflict. It really did bring the country together. We had soaring volunteering for about 5 years after 9/11, and this spirit of civic connectedness continued. Unfortunately, we've lost a lot of ground in recent years, and a lot of work to do. Sorry, I go on and on.
Whatever you want to say. It's all right. I just want to make sure we hit upon each of your main missions. So,
I can do them quickly.
well, let's just sort of review. There's about, I think, 3 or 4 that.
Malaria is a big one, high school dropout, National Park to Oceans, and National Service would be the ones.
Sort of put those in order of how you
Yeah.
spend your time, I would say.
Okay.
And then are those all under the umbrella of
Civic enterprises, yeah.
Okay, so let's just start off with, well, today I'm
Yeah,
CEO
I'll say,
of Civic Enterprise.
so after I left the White House, I wanted to basically do what I was doing in the White House.
Start that again.
Okay.
Really clearly, like we're really starting this.
Got it. So after I left the White House, I wanted to do what I had done in the White House, but in the private sector without as much of the politics, and to see if that was actually possible. And so I brought together experts from around the country, Republicans, Democrats, almost regardless of politics, based on their expertise and their contribution. And we've worked on 4 main areas. The first, I discovered in the White House with the president and the team that there was this fully preventable and treatable disease called malaria that was killing more than 1.2, mostly women and children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. And it was completely needless. It was actually something that we could eliminate eventually, or certainly prevent and treat. And so the President's Malaria Initiative emerged, and then we started a nonprofit called Malaria No More, and set 2 goals: universal coverage of bed nets. If you sleep under a bed net, you're protected from the bite of the mosquito that gives you malaria, basically. And the second goal was to end malaria deaths by 2015. And the excitement was that all these people across sector, across party, we fostered the creation of this African Leaders Malaria Alliance. So we had heads of state, finance, and health ministers in more than 40 countries in Africa, part of it, and really involved in it. And the results have been 7 million lives saved since we started it. Now, we haven't ended malaria deaths. We're at about from 1.2 million to about 300,000 a year, so we still have work to do. But you wake up every day and you think, we're part of something that matters to people. The second big area of interest has been this high school dropout epidemic, where we discovered that 1.2 million young people were dropping out of high school, and it was devastating to their lives. And then they would often go on to have children who in turn would live in poverty and drop out of high school and not have any socio-economic mobility. And so we did this nationally representative survey of young people who had dropped out across the country. And I went into Philadelphia, and this girl who was 18 at the time, she had dropped out at 16, took over the whole focus group. And when we asked her, what did you want to be in life? She said, I wanted to be an astrophysicist. And we said, a what? And she said, I was inspired by the space program, and I wanted to be an astrophysicist. 30 minutes later in the conversation, we asked the same little girl, what are you doing now? And her head dips down, and she says, I'm working the streets of Philadelphia. She was literally a prostitute on the streets of Philadelphia. And I know that's sort of a dramatic example, but it was at that moment that our group and the Gates Foundation and other people we were working with said that through the voices of young people, and all these young people, the vast majority of them could have made it. They have big dreams, just like the kids I just met with here at Indian Hill, who have extraordinary dreams. And, we need to provide the kind of supports in those schools where they're trapped for them to realize those dreams. The third big project has been our oceans are in trouble. 90% of the large fish and the apex predators are gone. Half of the coral reefs are gone. The ocean's warming. It's losing oxygen, and because the ocean actually regulates the climate, our weather patterns, obviously provides food, transportation. It's sort of the central nervous system of the planet, and it's 70% of the Earth. We're working to bring the national park idea to the ocean, because 100-some years ago, this big idea to put large tracts of land into federal custody for the protection and enjoyment and use of future generations was called America's Best Idea. And it's literally, saved, I think, life on the planet in some sense, and the biodiversity. And so we need to bring that same energy and idea to the oceans. And we've had some progress. Some marine reserves have been created. But the big opportunity is actually the high seas, the open ocean. And if we could protect most of the open ocean, which currently isn't needed for food security, and is not something that's, like the coastal waters where people are fishing heavily and using those resources, if we could protect what E.O. Wilson calls half Earth, we could really provide a much better planet for generations down the road. My last project that I'm probably as passionate about as anything I've ever done is this big idea that to create a common expectation and a common opportunity for 18 to 28-year-olds, young people as they come of age, to have a year of national service where they can work with young people who are different from them, just like the military, different backgrounds, different income levels, black, white, Latino, young people who have disabilities, but all have contributions to make. And at pretty low cost to the taxpayer, you could put 1 million young people every year into national service. And it wouldn't, not, mentoring and tutoring students in low-performing schools, cleaning up rivers and parks, building Habitat for Humanity homes for returning veterans and their families, helping to reintegrate veterans back home when they come back from this traumatic experience of war. And the people who've had these service experiences, it transforms the rest of their lives. They think differently about, whether they're working for Procter & Gamble, whether they're working for a nonprofit, whether in the healthcare sector, whether they're in government. They have a different perspective on their responsibilities. And to me, that's the biggest idea I can think about that would actually heal a divided nation and knit the country back together. And you create this generation of leaders who would know Republicans and Democrats and independents, who would know Christians and Muslims and Jews, who would know black, white, Latino, know people from, the poor inner city or poor Appalachia, married with people from Indian Hill. And I think that kind of experience would really bring people together.
Do you feel that seems like that's the bold idea at the end.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I just want to make sure I'm giving you an opportunity to say everything you want to say about that. And
Yeah,
if there's sort of
yeah.
another, what do you think is either the biggest challenge in that area or your biggest area of opportunity? Or
Okay.
I'm just opening it up.
No, that's
but
good.
Just to make sure giving you a chance to make sure you've expanded upon these as much as you want.
Sure. So when I was in Indian Hill schools, there was tremendous trust in the institution, faith in our teachers, love of our coaches. When I asked the young Indian Hill students I just met with, these seniors, to tell me about their teachers and how life was here and the school play and the facilities we saw and being part of the, broadcast network facility and their sports and their extracurricular activities, they're sort of kind of brimming with hope and enthusiasm, and most of them were wearing the shirts where they're going to go on to college. And so it's just such a hopeful, trusting place. And we just released a major report called Civic Deserts, which shows the lowest levels of trust in one another, lowest levels of institutional trust, low rates of volunteering, low rates of voting. 38 million Americans are isolated and live alone. We have a doubling of hate groups in the United States since 1990. And communities are literally being torn apart. And so I think the big challenge for the country is actually not any one particular public policy area of, even though we have failing schools and we have a healthcare system that needs to improve, and we have environmental conditions married with progress that have to work hand in hand. Those are all big challenges. But I think the biggest challenge for the country is actually to figure out big ideas to knit us back together. Now, World War II did that for us organically, but is it going to have to take a war to bring the country back together? And that's why I think this idea of a year or more of national service at a really formative time in life, even for, for students from Indian Hill that have had so many extraordinary experiences, I think it would awaken them as much as it would awaken young people from low-performing schools or the inner city or more challenging circumstances to this notion that, back to the Jefferson's notion of the pursuit of happiness, that like we're in a collective enterprise, we help one another achieve. And in a democracy that's not founded on, a monarch or even a plot of land, but an idea of big citizenship, our democracy will only be healthy if we jump in and all have that ethic.
That's an interesting idea right there, big citizenship.
Yeah.
It's its own concept.
Big citizenship, yeah. Yeah.
Do you think you could help us craft a statement in here that would, about, a lot of what you just said is the importance of volunteerism, the importance of your community, and that is a lot of the strength of what Indian Hill has to offer, because
Yeah. Sorry. He's locked out. He's got the key.
Well, what I was going to say is, population now,
Yeah.
60% do not live in Indian Hill. Not everybody is.
Okay.
Not everybody
Yeah.
is at this high economic social level.
I should make that point,
And
that, yeah.
This is a public school.
Yeah.
It is extraordinary because of private commitment.
Yeah.
Like your parents.
Yeah.
That kind of investment and
Yeah.
showing up. And frankly, the giving, but the showing up.
Right.
And I don't want to, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but maybe you can help us kind of
Yeah.
tell our audience a little bit about, that is why this is why
Yeah.
this works.
Yes.
It's a public school. We can't do it without that kind of commitment.
Got it.
We just
Yeah,
spent
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot of time
60%
talking
come
about-
from outside the district.
Is that right?
60% of the
The
students
last split I had was 45% within the village, 55%.
55%.
outside the village. Okay.
Most.
And not that
Yeah.
we have to like nail down the specifics of who's where on the scale. but
No, no,
just
this
that-
is right.
This is a broad audience.
Okay. Let's do
We're
it.
trying to kind of lift up
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
to be their best.
Right. So when I think about the village of Indian Hill and Indian Hill schools, for me it's been a field of dreams, literally, from nursery school through 12th grade, and foundational for any success that I've had in life. And frankly, dealing with also difficult times in my life, it's really helped to provide that strength. And when people think of Indian Hill, they do think of a wealthy, well-knitted community. But interestingly, 45% of the students in the Indian Hill schools come from outside the village of Indian Hill.
It's the other way around.
55.
Oh, it's 55%. Here I am messing it up already. All right, Dr. Miles, here, you do this.
You can make
Oh, darn it. Okay, I probably wasn't any good
I
anyway.
would just say, just so that we have proper percentage, just say
Over half.
Over half. And
Over
it
half
can
come
be
out,
60, 55,
come from outside the village of Indian Hill, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then there are students who have, high-need students, and right?
Yes.
And we need to provide resources and computers, and what are the most specific needs of the...
Academic, social, emotional needs. Our kids have a lot of stress upon them these days.
Okay.
They strive to be the very best.
Yeah.
They also bring to us a variety of needs and expectations, and it is our mission to fulfill
Yeah.
all of those.
Yeah, okay, that's good.
They're bringing a lot of, their personal situations are so varied.
Yes,
And you
yeah,
can't just,
Right.
It might look great on the outside and maybe not.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, okay.
50, more than half.
Yeah, so I'll say,
More than half.
so one thing I've learned recently is that more than half of the students who come to Indian Hill actually come from outside the village of Indian Hill. And some of the stereotypes about it being a wealthy village that doesn't need support are not true. And there are a lot of students, in fact, all students at some level, who have social and emotional and academic needs. They walk into these buildings with their lives, which are hopes and dreams, but also traumas and challenges and sometimes difficult family circumstances. They need the support at every level, and it's incumbent, I think, upon all of us in this community to help all students who come here, whether it's provision of computers and books and the resources they need to thrive, or the social and emotional supports that can help them manage their difficult circumstances and deal with trauma. And I'm an enthusiastic supporter of the Indian Hill Foundation, and I have been for years, because I recognize that this community and these schools gave so much to me, and without it, I wouldn't have the opportunities in life that I've had. And if we can step forward and contribute to ensure that these ripples of hope that we're sending out through our support touch so many additional lives, we'll be able to look back and see stronger communities, not just here, but all across the country and all across the world. Is that okay?
That was absolutely beautiful.
And so give at least $100,000 tonight.
Yeah. Just, you can stop just for a second, so we just